work that you're already doing on this particular topic. And so that brings me to this Intra-Faith education series. And I guess I feel it's particularly important to say this tonight so that it hopefully will continue to help us all ask our questions with dignity and respect, but also with curiosity. And that is that as I was sitting there, I was thinking about why did I go into being religion in the first place, or being a minister. And I think it does for me in my own life. It was always about prejudice, even as a child. I was always very bothered by any kind of prejudice that I saw around me, and the teachings that I learned in church about Jesus and God, was that prejudice had no place in God's world and the way Jesus lived Jesus' life. And so this whole idea of intra-faith was to, I think most of us in the room know, and we certainly know around the world and in this country, that there's a lot of prejudice between religions. But there's also at times, we have prejudice within our own traditions. That if, for example, in Christianity, there's so many different Christian denominations, and Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, and all the different Protestants. There are a lot of things we disagree about, and we have our prejudices with each other. We have prejudice, the liberal Christians have prejudices about the evangelical Christians, about the Pentecostal Christians. And so the non-Christian world gets very confusing. How to understand Christianity when you have all this stuff going on. So I think particularly around Islam, it's one of the fastest growing religions in the world, correct? What's the number now in terms of world population?
1 out of 5 people in the world are Muslims.
1 out of 5 people in the world are Muslims. So I think it behooves us as world citizens, whether we're religious or not, to understand as much as we can about Islam and all of its diversity. And that's what the attempt was tonight, for you to scratch the surface of the 3 primary, what would be the best word? Strict denominations. I don't know if you really use that word, or is that fair? What word do you use?
Well, Sufism we don't consider as a denomination. It's either Sunni or Shia.
Right. Okay. So do you say
Sufi is someone, just a Muslim that's more into the spiritual aspects.
And see, that's what I want you to hear. I want you to hear that I don't know what they're going to say to each other, but I want to invite our 3 speakers to be dishonest. Because I want you to observe that and take that out into the world, not because you now have become an expert. Let's be really careful when we leave tonight. None of us will be experts on Islam, but beginning to have a sense of talking a little more about it. And that's the other thing I really want to encourage you. When you're working with your colleagues and you're meeting your neighbors and your kids are going to school with people who are not the same tradition as you, encourage them to learn about the tradition, and then encourage them to ask questions that are respectful and filled with dignity. I get so tired that we can't be learning from each other about these important topics, and instead talk about mundane things that maybe don't really matter at the end of the day. So this is the time for questions. Who has a question? Yes, Elizabeth. And if you can make it for a particular speaker or just in general.
I just was wondering that quite some years ago when I came here, we women prayed out in that room there, and only the men were in here. Is that typical of the different faiths, or do they still do that here?
Why don't you come up here, Ebrahim? I don't want to give you all much.
So yes, the women pray in the room back there. And when you see the sunset prayer, when you see how the men bow and prostrate, if you're a woman, you probably don't want to have men see you in that position. So the women in almost all masjids in the world are in the back. Here we have a more solid wall. In other places, they're just drapes. But when you see the prayer today, the adult men will be the first rows, and then children that have not reached puberty will be in the back. And then women, we have very few women. We rarely have women come here except for quiet prayer. So the women would be in behind this door, and then girls that haven't reached puberty would be way in the back.
Just
Yes.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Suzanne?
Yeah, the question I had is, the Quran was written as it was written and is unchanged. And what happens when questions come up in modern day times that require some kind of understanding or interpretation? Is there a mechanism for that, and is it centralized, or is it dispersed among the different
So
units?
yeah, so in Sunni, so
I'm doing something wrong now.
If a question arises, just an example, if a question arises when the first man went on the moon, something, hey, this is something new. So as a Muslim, what are you to do? You're allowed to believe this or not. So the first thing one would do is one would look in the Quran, the final revelation, and say, what does the Quran have to say about going outside this earth? Does the Quran have anything? If you don't find it in the Quran, if you don't find the answer in the Quran, you look at the sayings of the Prophet, the Hadith. The Prophet's life and his sayings are very well documented. There's books and books about his sayings, which is different from the Quran. The Quran, we believe, is Allah's word. These are just his sayings that have been recorded. One would look into that to see, hey, is there something in there that gives me this answer? If, in spite of that, you don't find an answer in the Hadith, then there's a gathering of scholars. So scholars from different areas, depending on how important the question is, different scholars would get together. They would discuss this in the light of the Quran and the Hadith, and then they would come up with a fatwa or a ruling that yes, this can happen. If all that fails and you don't have time, then at the end of it, it's your conscience. So if something urgent happens and you can't decide, what should I do? Then what your heart tells you is probably right, so it's your conscience. But that's the last resort. So again, going back to this question about, hey, can you believe that man could have landed on the moon? When the scholars got together, the first verse in the Quran, the very first verse in the Quran says, "Praise be to Allah, the ruler of the worlds." Plural. It's the first sentence. So when scholars got together, that was one thing. Then the Prophet ﷺ had made the night journey where he had traveled from Medina to Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem to the seven heavens. So clearly there's a precedent of being able to leave this earth. So based on that, the scholars made a ruling, yes, Muslims can believe that humans are going to go out and leave this earth. So Islam, in Sunni Islam, it's very well defined when new questions arise. But at the same time, things cannot be changed. One can't say, well, this is you can't put new meanings into it. For example, in a passage in the Quran, if the meaning isn't clear, then one should look at how did the Prophet interpret it to be. If the Prophet never mentioned it, how did his followers, immediate followers, interpret it to be? So there's a whole science. You can't, some modern day person can't come in and say, hey, this is what this passage now means. So there's a whole science or process for coming up with Islamic rulings.
So what time is the?
So let me. Just maybe one question. Quick question.
Do you believe in Satan?
Yes. So we believe Allah created three forms of life. Humans, or from clay, angels from light, and the jinn. The jinn, another group from fire, and Satan is from among the jinn. So among the jinn, there are also Muslims and non-Muslims. So Satan is from the jinn. Yes.
Could you tell me what the differences between the Sunnis and Shiites are?
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes.
I think it's very clear. When we select our prayer leader, when we select who's going to lead the prayers, we have a set of criteria of selection. So we look at the person as, is he a pious person? Is he a good character, good morals, etc., etc. Then we look at how much knowledge of Islam does he have. Then we look at whether how much of the Quran he's memorized, on and on, whether he has a beard or not. And then we have a pecking order on who leads the prayers. Among the Shia, there's an extra criteria if you're blood relation of the Prophet. We think that's irrelevant. So